Unshelling Medicine podcast. Healthcare in the language we understand.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode. Today, I have the pleasure of having Scott Rawa, PhD, with us. Hi, Scott. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Wonderful. So, Scott, can you clue us into what we're discussing today?
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk to you about a topic called GI psychology. So,
Ooh.
regarding the digestive tract, and this is particularly going to be useful for anyone that has digestive issues, which is, some estimates are about like 40% of people at any one time. So, almost half of us at any one time are going to have digestive issues. We don't tend to talk about this kind of stuff because there's all this stigma about digestion and symptoms and that kind of stuff. But that's our topic for today is GI psychology.
I love it. GI psychology. We've had many topics of talking about the importance of your gut health. So we're going to get into the psychology of things, and we're going to talk about the not so nice things that our gut and our GI system is meant to do naturally. And I love this conversation. So all the gases and poopy stuff, we're going to definitely have that conversation today. So I'm excited. As a nurse, this is a dream topic. So are you ready to get into it, Scott?
Let's do it.
I love it. So GI psychology, for a layperson, what is that?
So it's a super interesting question let me start with like a surprising fact. Some of the most effective treatments and interventions for some of the most common GI disorders, like IBS, for example, are psychological interventions. And that is a surprising thing because these are real medical conditions, right? The IBS is a real medical condition. And it's not, devaluing it as just a psychological condition, but there's something that when we intervene on the mental emotional side of things, it seems to be, or it's proven to be, quite effective for real medical conditions like IBS. And so the question is, how could that possibly be, right? These are not psychological disorders, they're medical disorders. So how is it that psychological intervention can be so effective? Well, that opens the door for this whole big topic of GI psychology. What is GI psychology? Well, the basis of GI psychology is the concept of the gut-brain connection, which is something a lot of people have heard that term before, but what does it actually mean? The gut and the brain are highly connected, more connected than most systems in the body, right? As you're a little fetus in a womb, those two parts of the body are like starting from the same place and they start to differentiate over time. But there's just right from the very beginning, there's a core connection between these two systems in the body. And there's like a super highway connection of information that the brain is connected to the gut. All right. There's like this information that flows down from the brain to the gut, but there's also information that flows up from the gut to the brain. A lot of people that have digestive issues and have kind of dug around a bunch come across the idea of the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve in some way is a helpful or important thing to understand or to strengthen. Well, the reason why vagus nerve interventions and the vagus nerve in general is kind of hot right now is because that is how the gut connects back to the brain through the vagus nerve. And it just turns out when things are dysregulated in the gut-brain connection, the vagus nerve is involved. But outside of the whole vagus nerve topic here, when things are dysregulated between the gut and the brain, it turns out that is a big part of what causes symptoms.
Wow. So for somebody who may not know what IBS is irritable bowel syndrome, right? So it's something that has a myriad of symptoms, right? But it's just like a collection of symptoms. It can be for lack of a better term, a bubble gut, or a lot of flatulence, or, gas, getting gassy. And when we talk about the vagus nerve, I want you to really, so people understand where this is kind of located. Could you just pinpoint the location of this nerve that, if stimulated, can actually cause somebody to either pass out or actually interrupt the heart rhythm?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is an interesting question, right? Because if you were to map all the starts, it's a cranial nerve, right? So it starts
Right.
in the head and like near the brainstem. And if you map out pretty much any other nerve pattern, right, there's this like little like river kind of stream, and it kind of starts here and ends here, right? I think it's
Right.
the 10th cranial nerve. You would know this better than I. I'm not medically trained, but
Yeah,
it's a cranial nerve,
it is.
and starts in the. I'm glad I got that one right. And it winds down and kind of comes through the neck, and then it goes and it innervates almost the entire torso. So it touches on almost every single organ system, I should say. And so it has a huge effect on many aspects of our health, but it's particularly important in our GI health because there's this whole separate nervous system that controls the digestive system. It's called the enteric nervous system, where people refer to it as the second brain in your gut. And so because this huge superhighway, that comes through and goes all the way, it affects the heart, affects the lungs, affects the abdomen, all these organs in the abdomen. When there's dysregulation of that nerve, it's affecting a lot of things, and it's affecting this whole nervous system of the enteric nervous system. The amount of disruption that happens can be quite significant. And that's why, because of this anatomy, that's why GI disorders are particularly stress sensitive, right? Like more than so I have something, we might have time to get into it. The reason why I'm like all jazzed up about this topic is because it's near and dear to my heart. I have something called Crohn's disease, right? And for any chronic GI condition or any medical condition, there's going to be some component of stress makes it worse. But GI conditions are super sensitive to stress. I mean, someone that doesn't have any GI conditions or issues, if you get someone stressed enough, they're going to start having GI symptoms probably before anything else, right? There's just such a sensitivity there.
I love how you explained the pathway of, the vagus nerve, and it keeps going. And, the one area that we used to do when we're talking about GI symptoms, when in the past, us nurses, when somebody was constipated, we often, after using bowel prep, giving them medication or whatever to kind of like relieve themselves, if that was not successful, something that we used to do was digital disimpaction, right? What is that? It's basically going in and basically physically pulling the poop out of the person, right? And what that used to trigger was a lot of unnecessary medical concerns, right? Including, the brain, dysfunction, cardiac dysfunction. People can send themselves into dysrhythmia either by disimpacting themselves or being disimpacted. So that is something that we don't do anymore. And it just shows how cool that connection could actually be, in the anal cavity, where you may not think is that sensitive, but yes, it is. It's very much connected to the brain. So I like how you mapped it all the way down to the GI system.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's just fascinating stuff that there's these things called vagal nerve stimulators where they go in with you've seen this in like a major surgery in our kind of like a pacemaker, kind of like a pacemaker device in crude medical terms here. You would know better than I, but there's this stimulator, like a vagal nerve stimulator, and they put this, down, in the lower back region where that connects to the colon, right? And the vagus nerve has this innervation, and that seems to be promising for people with Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, that type of thing. That's a significant intervention, significant surgery, but it really is a interesting piece of information because it proves the fact there's something going on there. And thankfully, there are much more less invasive, more holistic ways of building up that kind of vagus nerve stimulation, or what that's part of this parasympathetic nervous system.
Right. So to get a little personal with you, so yes, people get diagnosed with conditions, chronic conditions, or just acute conditions on a daily basis, right? So it takes just a very few people get so passionate about their diagnosis that they dig a little deeper. What was the turning point for you to dig a little deeper to a diagnosis that you received? And what, like, how many years into your diagnosis did you feel like, you know what, maybe I need to understand this a little better?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to this. So, to be completely honest with you, I got diagnosed in 2006. So, I was 24 years old. I was in my first year in graduate school for clinical psychology. And I was spent like probably at least 2 years in denial. And, I'm in my early to mid 20s, and I did not want this incurable severe disease diagnosis. So I just, like a 20 something year old might do, I just tried to pretend like it didn't happen, right? And that I'll figure it out and blah, blah, blah. And so I continued to kind of eat unhealthy, and I drank alcohol and all these things that are really not good for Crohn's disease. And
Right.
at some point, reality slammed me down enough times. I just have a vivid memory still. I was in so much pain and so much despair that I had this kind of like moment of like, I can't live with like this anymore. I can't continue to do this. And so that started this process of really coming to terms that I have this disease, and this isn't going away, and it's really affecting my life. And so the pendulum swung like the opposite direction, and I felt like I just read everything I could about what makes this better, right? I didn't want this to
So
take
you
over
became
my life.
obsessed with it. You came from not caring to being obsessed with it.
I dove in deep and like made it my mission. If for a while, like, I guess part of the denial still phase was that I was going to figure out if I just tried hard enough, I was going to cure myself. Right. And I'm sure there are cases of being cured, but for the most part, these inflammatory bowel diseases, the one I have, there is no known cure at this point. Right. So all this information will still apply to people that have another category of digestive disorders that are much more common. And we can come back to that. But what I became obsessed with it, I kind of I tried all the diets, tried all the things. I got into like, there's nothing too kooky. And I've done some like really interesting, risky type off the beaten path things to try and do anything that could help. And the thing that is kind of ties us back to this topic of GI psychology is I was obsessed with it. I literally got a doctorate in psychology that included all these health psychology classes because I thought that I took an interest in health psychology. I was looking for everything I could. And it wasn't, even despite all that stuff, it wasn't until like in my late 30s that I found this topic called GI psychology. Right. And so like this is a real bona fide research, empirically supported branch of science, right? That is practiced in like the best medical centers in the world. And, it's really a part of the standard of care and recognized in a lot of places. But despite all that, no one seems to know. It took me forever to even just find this, and I'm in the field, right? So I was super excited to find this. And why would anyone be excited about this field? Well, like, here's how I would say it. GI disorders are super common, right? They're like one of the most common types of ailments we have. And at the same time, they're tricky. They're tricky to treat, right? Whether they're like kind of like a disease like I have, or the more common class of GI disorders, they are tricky to effectively manage and really get under control. And it turns out, it seems as though one of the big reasons why is because it's not just a physical disorder, right? Because of the thing we were talking about before, the gut-brain connection and all of that, they are mind-body disorders. they're real medical conditions, and they are highly influenced by the mental, emotional, depression, anxiety, even past trauma is
Mhm.
proven to be a factor here.
Mhm.
So this opens up a really important piece of the puzzle that a lot of people aren't aware of. And so it
Yes, it
hasn't
is.
cured me. I still have Crohn's disease, but there's all these concepts and tools now that have made things much smoother and way more under my control.
So you have a better understanding of your diagnosis, and you have a more, for lack of a better way to put it, a more intimate understanding of what makes your diagnosis what it is. Yes, lifestyle is a big factor in controlling it, right? But also understanding that your emotional health plays a big role in it. We're talking about, your history with Crohn's disease. When we're talking about ulcers, stomach ulcers, right? It plays into that same pattern, right?
Absolutely.
You're stressed, you're depressed, you're not eating properly, and all of these things affect how much the acid production in your stomach works, right? It also affects how much the mucus in your stomach that is supposed to protect the lining, right? The lining of I should say the mucosa. I'm trying to say it in a way that everybody can understand what I'm talking about, right? So your stomach is an acid producing organ, right? And within your stomach, the mucus that is really unique to your stomach to protect the muscle itself from erosion, right? So when you're stressed, when you're not eating properly, when you're depressed, and when that brain gut connection is not well aligned, guess what? The pumps are producing, they may overproduce, but guess what? The mucus may not be thick enough to protect the stomach muscles, right? And then we end up with all this erosion that is stomach ulcers. So I love how you mentioned it is not just Crohn's disease, because there's so many other gut disorders that are very much connected in that pattern. So did you find like you were surprised by the things that you discovered in your learning about your own disease?
Yeah. Was I surprised? I would say my main emotional reaction was excitement. Because I was like, oh my gosh,
Oh,
this totally makes sense, right? And now it gives me agency on how to
right.
influence this stuff more. And it also, so something, one of the most impactful things that I've done in my life was I took this 8-week meditation course back in like 2013. And it's a famous meditation course. It's called mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's one of the reasons why we have all this data about mindfulness being so effective is
Right.
because of this course. This guy John Kabat-Zinn is just this badass, and he like has changed a lot of things for us in the medical and psychological community. And
Yes.
so you're meditating a lot in that 8 weeks, right? You're like every day for a significant amount of time, and you get to this level of depth, right? Beyond where like what a 10-minute or 20-minute here and there meditation can really get you. And you get to this like
Right.
experiential level of depth, like, oh, that's what they're talking about, you know? And that changed my life. And like ever since then, I've been pretty much a daily meditator. And so if we were to, let's put this in context for a second. So when we
Right.
say GI disorders are mind-body disorders, and you say, hey, stomach ulcers are highly influenced by your stress and lifestyle and all that kind of stuff, what does someone do with that information, right? What I like to do, I like to be a little playful. Like in therapy, what I often like to do, just for making it fun in contrast,
Right.
is I will say to someone, usually in the beginning of our work, I'll be like, all right, let's take a little pause here. I'm gonna sit in this chair and I'm gonna be a crappy therapist to you for a moment. And then it'd be like, okay, as a crappy therapist, it sounds like you're saying like you're fretting all the time, you're anxious, you're
Mhm.
worrying, and you're seeing how much this worrying is not helping and it's just making things worse. Maybe you should just like stop worrying so much. You should just chill out and stop being
But
so anxious.
how?
Right?
But
And
how?
and that's kind of the reason why I do that. Is there's a couple of reasons. Number one, that is logical, right? That's a rational kind of thing. But the effect of it is it's shaming, right? If I literally did that to a client, I'd be shamed. What's wrong with you that you're so anxious? Why don't you just stop being so anxious? Stop worrying about it. It's making everything worse, right? And so that is actually just going to make it worse because now it's just shaming someone, right? And also, it's a lot of people recognize when we put it in these like ridiculous terms, right? They can see it's kind of what they're doing to themselves often. Right. And so what does someone do with this information that we're talking about? Hey, you've got these stomach ulcers and it's because a factor of it is because you're stressed. You need to stop being so stressed. Right. Which is now this internal crappy therapist. What is the alternative here? Yeah. Right. What's an alternative is we can see, okay, stress doesn't cause any GI disorder, right? Even stomach ulcers. There's no evidence that stress is a causing factor. There's a lot of evidence to say it's the fuel that keeps it going and makes it worse once it's started, right? And so if it's not this binary right or wrong, black and white thing of don't stop being stressed, you shouldn't be stressed or whatever it is, but instead being able to kind of see the nuance and the layers here, right? What are you eating? What are these layers of the diet? What's the layers of how fast, intense you are in your life, right? There's all these kinds of ways we can see these layers that at some point, if you can just maybe imagine like a little graphic here, right? There's like, at some point, there's this line of a symptom threshold, right?
It's almost like an inventory, taking an inventory of what is going on in your life. Right? Taking an inventory of your stresses, your eating patterns, your habits, in a sense.
Totally. Yeah. And so the body is saying, stop, no, right? And if you're taking inventory, just a little change here and a little change here and a little change on something you can do to slow things down a little bit, right? That all can drop you below that symptom threshold, right? It doesn't mean you have to stop being anxious or stop having stress, right? We live in a very stressful, fast-paced world.
Right. So on a personal note, so you had this great experience to, have this meditation, right? Were you able to draw a correlation of, symptom reduction after you engaged in these meditative practices?
Great question. I would say it was most obviously the other way. And so yes, in the opposite way, meaning I'm an anxiety prone person. My nervous system is prone to anxiety. I can easily get sped up and want to just
you, Scott. not you at all.
You probably don't pick that up at all about me.
Absolutely not you.
I'm just like, I get excited about this stuff, but I'm prone in that direction, right? Some nervous systems are prone towards depression. Some nervous systems are prone to anxiety. I'm more kind of prone to anxiety. And when I fall off meditation for enough days in a row, I start to get noticeably more anxious. And my symptoms of Crohn's disease become way more possible and kind of frequent or severe.
All right. That's a good thing that you're able to hone in on what actually helps with managing, that anxiety and the symptoms that comes with it. So something that you mentioned that I want to go back to, you said in, basically reaching what I would say your rock bottom. I was like, okay, there's got to be a different way of living. This is just not it. You also mentioned that you started engaging in very risky behaviors. Like I would only think maybe fad diets. So what would your recommendation be for a person like you who is at a point of, okay, we've got to find something, and the pendulum swings just like it swung for you? What are the hard stops or safeguard, or what's another word, stop loss in a sense, for the financial people? What is that stop loss that you would suggest a person has so they don't engage in behaviors that can actually worsen their diagnosis?
Yeah, good question. You're good at this. So
I try.
here's what I would say. Like, there's like, let me give you the ideal, and then we'll work our way down to we'll work our way down. So the ideal
Okay.
situation, if you think about GI psychology, is one part of an integrated approach, right? And the
Right.
integrated approach, or you're familiar with the idea of a biopsychosocial model, right? And a lot of people don't know that jargon, but an integrated approach is really the best standard we have available these days. It turns out to be the most effective, right? And so the integrated approach specifically for GI disorders is like using my hands here. I guess I gesticulate a lot, but like I'm trying to like put a visual here. So imagine a 3-part
We love
Venn
it.
diagram. Where my hand is right now, up here, is the medical side, right? Like these are medical conditions, right? We need to start with the medical, get accurate diagnosis, right? As we were saying before, there's 2 different types of GI disorders. Finding out which type you have is an important factor, right? Because if you have Crohn's disease and you think it's IBS, that can be quite dangerous, right? If you're not getting enough of the medical interventions, right? There's medications, there's surgery, there's all that kind of stuff that at least need to be ruled out, right? So we have that part. Then number 2, even before we get to GI psychology, the dietary interventions are huge, right? And then just to complete the Venn diagram, down here, the 3rd part of like the overlapping circles is GI psychology, the mind-body connection and the mind-body tools and that kind of stuff. So a stopgap here would be, number 1, make sure you have like a legit medical diagnosis, not just, your own Googling of things. Number 2, what would have been really helpful for me, and I wish I had done in hindsight, would be to seek out a dietitian, a registered dietitian that specializes in GI disorders. You would think all dietitians specialize in GI disorders, but they don't, right? That's a good, important recognition that like only some of them specialize in GI disorders. So in the ideal world, you'd find someone that does that. Shout out to my friend Nikki, diarrhea dietitian. She's excellent. And, just even if it's just a couple sessions, if you only afford a couple sessions, she's going to steer you, or a professional like this will steer you in the direction of like, I know it's really popular right now, and I know there's all these videos. Don't just eat butter. I thought keto was the answer. And my friends still make fun of me for it. I would eat butter. I would eat just butter alone, which is just disgusting. But when you really don't want to feel horrible, you'll eat just butter.
Yeah. Right.
And I've learned that's not the way to go, right? So and so that's the ideal, is to get a legit medical diagnosis, get a legit consultation at least, or a little bit of treatment or some treatment from a registered dietitian that specializes in GI disorders. And this is not just if you have severe like Crohn's disease. This is like still like reflux, IBS, indigestion, all of those more common disorders. And then number 3, there's the psychological stuff we can kind of talk about. If someone is financially more limited and can't, there's no way around the diagnosis, like that has to be done. But if someone is financially limited for the diet piece of things, there's some really quality information out there. And dietitians in general, if you can't, a good professional will, if you say, hey, I would love to work with you, I just can't afford it right now, can you steer me in the right direction of the things to kind of read about? There's something called the FODMAPs diet, FODMAPS. That has a lot of research behind it the majority of people that are going to be watching this probably are going to be struggling with IBS because that's the most common, right? And there is a lot of research behind the FODMAPs diet as something that could be particularly effective for people. It's not meant to be a forever diet. Like, it's actually dangerous to kind of stay on it forever. You do it for a period of time. There's a whole protocol. You can really research all that kind of stuff. That would be a stopgap.
Right. I love it. So, Nikki, hello. If you're listening to us, we'd like to have you on. So, I love her name, the diarrhea dietitian. That girl after my own heart. Um, so Nikki, I absolutely love that you mentioned the importance of having somebody who is licensed and trained, because the quite a few people who, based on your own personal diet, training other people or consulting with other people to diet. Your doctor's the first place. Get diagnosed properly so that you know exactly what you're dealing with. And I absolutely, absolutely, Scott, love how you brought in the financial aspect of things, because it's easy for us to sit here and pinpoint all of the things that you must do. What if my decision to see a dietitian has to do with keeping my lights on or feeding my children or paying my bills, right? Then what do I do? So the health insurance, also ask your insurance companies, because this is another for all the insurance companies out there, okay? CMS included. This is a way to save money, right? This is a way not to have to treat a chronic condition long term when it actually gets exacerbated. So there are insurance companies that have their own dietitian on staff that you can be referred to for consultation if you're diagnosed with anything. So look into your insurance company to see a dietary services is covered, and also a psychologist, right? Because again, it takes an interdisciplinary approach most times to address disease processes or diagnosis. So I want us to continue this conversation, Scott. I don't think this is absolutely it, because I love it. So in essence, in the spirit of leaving our viewers and our listeners with something, right? What would you say has been the most rewarding part of understanding your diagnosis in helping somebody else who may be experiencing the same thing?
Yeah. Wow. There's like so many different parts to that. Number one, it's just like when you yourself have really gone through something, right? There's just an
Right.
added depth of empathy that you can understand someone else's suffering in that area of their life much easier, right? And so I have all these different things I've put out there, and when I am including, at least at the time of this recording, right, there's like just free consultations. I don't charge anything, and just meet with people and kind of help steer them in the right direction. And it's really rewarding to be able to be in a place where I have like a lot of luxuries, right? I'm part of these professional organizations. I'm very kind of lucky and privileged in my life that I'm in this position that I can be behind the scenes in part of these professional organizations and link people up, because it's kind of like how I like to think about it is like, when you're like, you call your insurance company and you have to go through the menu, and then you
Right.
get to wait, and then you get transferred, and then all that kind of stuff.
Right.
For a lot of people, trying to find useful information about diet or psychological stuff, or a therapist can be like that. And so I love to be able to just cut through the noise and be like, oh, here's where to go, here's what to check out,
Right.
or don't waste your time there.
I there's so much of that lacking in the world. That is why I really honed in on starting this podcast, because
Mm.
people are actively seeking that information. However, there's a lot of disinformation out there. And I try as much as possible, as I am very holistic in my practices. I've started meditating regularly. I don't want to say I avidly meditate, because I'm still a work in progress, right? So it is great to be in a position where you can empathize. It gives you extra leverage, and it also makes the person listening to you trust you a little more because you understand in a sense. So I thank you for using your platform and your experiences to influence and guide others. It is commendable. So
Thank you.
the one thing that I'm definitely you're welcome, Scott. The one thing I'm going to definitely do is that if anybody's listening to this and you're curious to, explore how to move forward, just directions on where to go, I'm going to include all of Scott's business contact, including his website, whatever that is, in the show notes, right? So you can reach out to him. And for everybody who's listening, please let us know what you think about these episodes. We want to hear your input. All right. We want to hear how this was useful, because I know it's useful. It's going to be useful to somebody. So let us know how useful this was to you. We look forward to having another one of this. I am very interested in talking to Nikki. So Nikki girl, hello. So I'll absolutely love to have a conversation where, if possible, it will be 3 of us, Scott. So I appreciate you being here. And is there any final thought for our audience? Anything you'd like to leave?
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, we talked about meditation just because that's been my path, right? But this is not saying, all right, you gotta cut out the stress. You gotta start meditating, right? Meditation is one of the like proven tools, right? But really,
Right.
it's a personal thing to first learn about why does I'll keep this brief. There's 2 different parts of the nervous system in the what's called the autonomic nervous system. Okay. The autonomic nervous system is this branch of the nervous system, and there's kind of these 2 branches in that, right? There's the gas pedal and there's the brake pedal. There's the gas pedal of the sympathetic nervous system, and there's the brake pedal of the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So in the sympathetic nervous system, there's the famous fight and flight response, right? And the parasympathetic system is kind of like the opposite or the antidote to the activation, the fight and flight, all that kind of thing, right? And so the phrase that goes with that is when you're activating the parasympathetic nervous system, you're activating what's called the rest and digest response, right? And that's where the vagus nerve kind of gets involved, right? In this rest and digest parasympathetic activation. So there's a number of ways that you can build that parasympathetic brake into your nervous system. And if you can start to understand, one, how do your symptoms relate to the lack of parasympathetic activation, right? Like the rationale underneath all this kind of stuff, that's going to make whatever intervention way more powerful, because it's not just a should, right? It's not like I'm supposed to, whatever it is. It's you're understanding how these symptoms are getting created, right? And then number 2, there's a lot of different avenues, not just meditation, right? So there's a lot of ways to kind of do this thing. That would be my parting thought.
I know, different strokes for different folks, right? So meditation could be something for one person. It could be and meditation there's so many different forms of it. It's not always sit down, close your eyes, get transported to hyperspace, walking, movements, certain movements, can be healing and, meditative practices. You just have to find what works for you. However, you still need a professional guide to be able to figure out what works for you. So thank you everybody for listening to us. Scott, this was great. Thank you for being here. And yeah, we look forward to having you back. So everybody, I'm going to drop spots. Oh my goodness, look at that.
I'm already committed.
So I know. So I'll drop all of Scott's information for anybody who's interested, as stated. And yeah, we look forward to having this conversation again. All right. Thank you for being here, Scott.
Thank you. Adios.
Thanks for tuning in to Unshelling Medicine podcast. If you want to stay up to date with the latest episodes, make sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to leave us a review. Follow us on social media at Altruistic Scribe on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We share additional tips, updates, and health-related content that you won't want to miss. Have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes? Reach out to us at altruisticscribeco.com. We're always eager to hear from our listeners and tackle the health topics that matter most to you. Until next time, stay healthy and take care.